ever more complicated, as has been demonstrated, the practical implications for business seem increasingly difficult to fathom. It's been a difficult week on the British High Street, with both Toys R Us and Maplin Electronics going into administration yesterday. The announcements follow weak results from several big retailers, and with the shape of the transition agreement, let alone the final Brexit deal, still to be pinned down. Some businesses could be forgiven for being a little bit anxious. Elizabeth Glinker has been to visit one such firm.
If you run a business, the extent to which you're worried about Brexit probably depends on what you do. Based in Wiltshire, Epoxy Europe makes high-grade adhesives used in everything from pacemakers to CT scanners and satellites. Once manufactured, the product must be used within 48 hours, shipped across Europe at sub-zero temperatures.
I'm very worried. This business is at risk. If we don't know how we're going to solve the problem of customs and how that's going to work in the future, I don't know if we can stay here. We are under pressure from our customers, we're under pressure from our shareholders.
So if the likes of Boris Johnson or Liam Fox says, come, you should be more positive, we need to be trading with the world, what would you say?
Well, I'd say I am pretty positive. You don't get to do what I do unless you are positive, and I'm always optimistic. We've grown this business from nothing to where it is today through optimism, planning, investment. All those things take a positive attitude. But if I'm asked by my customers, what are you going to do? If I can't answer that question, the business is in trouble. It's a fundamental question of our existence.
Rex's company is in fact the only one on the European continent making these specialist products. 85% of his sales are with the EU.
At the moment we can ship to Barnsley just as easy as we can ship to Bratislava. It's just the same.
You would be hard-pressed to find a more literal example of the importance of frictionless trade. Since the UK voted to leave the EU, the economy has continued to grow. But we haven't actually left yet. And as the shape of any deal looks uncertain, many UK firms remain very concerned about the future.
Take the Welsh fishing fleet. Whilst the rest of the UK's fishermen are excited by the prospect of an end to EU quotas, the Welsh, who specialise in shellfish and sell the vast majority to France and Spain, think a little differently. The Anglo-Dutch food giant Unilever is yet to decide if its future remains in the UK. And the worries of the car industry with its cross-continental supply chains are well documented. Yesterday, Toyota committed to building its latest model in the UK, but said going forward it must be able to trade freely with the continent. A thinly veiled warning, perhaps echoing more widespread concern, something highlighted yesterday by the former Prime Minister John Major.
If you talk to a majority of the captains of industry, they are very strongly opposed to Brexit. They believe it will be bad for their industries. But most of them are extremely reluctant to speak out and say so, because they know half of their customers may be in favour of Brexit and half not.
This morning, a report from the Business Select Committee concluded that, at least for the automotive sector, Brexit negotiations are an exercise in damage limitation. For small firms like Epoxy, promises of future trade deals and calls for positivity only go so far.
And our guest of the day, Tim Martin, knows a bit about business and was a leading Leave campaigner in the EU referendum. We're also joined here in the studio by the chair of the Business Select Committee, the Labour MP Rachel Reeves. Welcome to the programme, and I'll come to you in just a moment. First of all, the chief executive of Maplin, which has now gone into administration, said there was a combination of factors, but cited very clearly a drop in the value of the pound post the referendum.
Well, it's very difficult to say, isn't it? Because if you look at VAT receipts for December, they were up 15%. Income tax was up 5%. So government receipts are very positive, as we know.
Yeah, but you must accept that the drop in the value of the pound has hit businesses.
No, it's hit a lot of them in a beneficial way.
But not Maplin.
It's an automatic stabiliser, a floating pound. It's gone up and down over the years, and that's a good thing. the countries that have problems are like Greece, where they haven't got that automatic stabiliser. So we're doing very well. Some of our products have gone up in value a bit, some have gone down. It's the way it operates.
Rachel, isn't this then the normal cycle of business? Because, as I said, he cited the drop in the value of the pound, but he did say there were other contributory factors. So alone, is it really a step too far to blame Brexit or the vote to leave the EU?
I certainly wouldn't blame Brexit for what's happened at Toys R Us and Maplin. I was just thinking back when I was growing up, and going to Toys R Us was a big treat. I remember going with my dad and sister, but I've got 2 small children and we haven't been to Toys R Us. I don't think it's stayed modern and moved with the times. So this isn't all about Brexit, but there are businesses, and my Select Committee today has put out a report on the automotive sector. There are businesses who are struggling and will struggle because of Brexit, especially if we don't get the sort of deal which ensures that frictionless free trade for things to move in and out of the country with ease and without tariffs.
Do you understand those concerns? I mean, even Toyota, who've made this announcement about building a new car in the UK, say it has to be on the basis of being able to trade freely with the EU.
I understand it up to a point, but the main aspect of the EU is that it's a customs union that puts barriers to trade outside the union. So it's free trade for 7% of the world, the other 93% not. So for us, it'll bring prices down. Now, for the car industry, they will either have to locate the parts, etc., they need from the other 93% of the world, which will happen in some cases, or we'll have to negotiate a deal. It's actually in everyone's interest to negotiate a deal, but I think that some people are jumping on a bandwagon of trying to frighten the public when we're talking about knocking down trade barriers, not putting them up by leaving.
Right.
The customs union should be called a tariff barrier union.
Do you agree with that? I mean, Tim Martin obviously wants to leave the customs union, doesn't want any sort of customs partnership or arrangement in the way that it has been put forward and in the way that Labour is supporting.
Well, if you look at the trade deals that the EU has with the rest of the world, there are more than 20 facilitating lower tariffs and more trade with other countries around the world. So I don't think it is
but
this,
not the big countries,
I don't think
Rachel.
it is this closed club. But if you look at Labour's policy of staying in a customs union, that will be good for the automotive sector and many other manufacturing sectors in particular that rely on just-in-time delivery and getting components in from other European countries very quickly. We went to Honda in Swindon, my Select Committee, and we saw vans arrive every 7 minutes to bring in parts. There were no warehouses. They went straight into the production line. That wouldn't be able to happen if you had these onerous customs checks, which is a risk with a hard Brexit.
Right, and nobody has been able to say categorically that any trade lost with the EU, if there isn't a deal done that remains frictionless in terms of goods and services, will be replaced in any short amount of time by trade deals with these other countries, even if you took the tariffs away. Well,
Rachel and her fellow MPs will have the power to abolish all tariffs on incoming goods into the UK on day one when we leave.
And what percentage of trade would that suddenly result in?
That will immediately result in a big boost to the incomes of people in the UK. So that's a very good start. Then you can negotiate with other countries for free trade agreements in addition.
Tim, but what we won't be able to do is get rid of the tariffs on things that we're exporting around the world. And so for British farmers, for British manufacturing companies, whether that's in pharmaceuticals or in automotives, we can't unilaterally get rid of the tariffs that other countries charge. And so the risk is if we do what you do, that does have a boost for consumers in the short term, but it will put British people out of work if we can't compete on a level playing field. I think it's a very real risk, Tim.
Yeah, I understand the point. The maths are that we import more than we export. So consumers will gain more in income than will be lost in
but surely our ambition
sales to the EU.
Is to be selling more things overseas, to be growing our production. If we go down your route, we would be putting more people in the steel business out of work. We'd be putting more farms and farm labourers out of work.
That's not true.
Putting more car manufacturers out of work.
That's not what happened in New Zealand or Australia. New Zealand farming
might be good for your business, Tim, but I don't think it'd be good for the ordinary British worker.
I think immediately the ordinary British worker will be better off because they're
Not if they
paying
don't
for
have
the
a job,
EU.
Tim. Not if they don't have a job.
I think that's a scare story, frankly. And if you look at Australian and New Zealand farmers, they've done extremely well on world markets when tariffs were abolished.
Let's move on to
a single automotive company that would come into our select committee and say that leaving the European Union would be good for them, not a single business or a single trade union.
Let's move on to the issue of immigration, because you have said that EU nationals are important to your business. How worried are you that there has been a slowing down in the rate of growth in the number of workers coming to the UK from the EU?
I think it's a slight, not exactly what I've said about EU workers, who are excellent workers. I've said I think the country benefits, like Australia, New Zealand, North America, Singapore, from a gradually rising population. We've got a relatively low birth rate, so I'd like to see the population continue to rise, and that's the main benefit from immigration. I would like to see immigration controlled by the UK government, not run by the unelected oligarchs of Brussels. That's what's wound up the population, not only in this country, but around the EU.
Would you be
we need democracy to run a decent...
So would you be open to the idea of staying in the single market then?
Well, the single market is a name. I'm in favour of immigration, but I want it to be controlled by the government, not by the EU. And at the moment, it's controlled by people we haven't elected. So yes to immigration, at a control level, subject to the will of the people, controlled by Rachel.
Right, isn't... flattery will get you everywhere. I mean, if you were in control, Rachel Reeves, wouldn't it be better that you are held accountable for decisions on immigration, whether you did keep levels relatively high, perhaps not as high as they are at the moment, because you could be blamed for it, rather than British governments successively blaming the EU?
I think the message was loud and clear at the referendum that people want to see tighter controls on immigration and British Parliament and British politicians making those decisions about who can come in and out of the country. And we do have to respect and understand those legitimate concerns that people have about the levels of immigration we've seen in recent years. So I do think we need to see change after the referendum. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's ensure that we can have that frictionless trade, that tariff-free trade. But we do also need to control immigration.
All right, a level of agreement there. Rachel Reeves, thank you. And for more